Hi, everyone. My name is George Hemingway,
And my name is Kate McLaughlin.
and welcome to Future Focused Techno-Economic Sustainability and Decision Modeling. Today, we're going to be talking about how we build decision models to help executives, CEOs, heads of minds, and heads of innovation and technology to make decisions around the future and around how they're going to transform their operations and change the mining industry as a whole. We're going to be sharing a few things with you today. One, we're going to be sharing our approach to making technology portfolio decisions and setting a clear vision of the future around operations and around the mining business. Now, a key part of that is this decision modeling, this techno-economic modeling, which sounds like what it is, a combination of technology options, economics, and operating environments that sort of blend together to help executives make a decision around what is possible, but also in a way that is grounded in reality. We're showing our approach to that today in three different ways that we help companies to do that. And to bring it to life, we'll be sharing some cases from tier one miners in underground mining, closure and closed sites, including one of the topics of the year, tailings, and around energy, how an executive who wanted to set some bold targets around scope 1, 2, and 3 around GHGs use these models to sort of make promises, both to the company, to society, and to Wall Street. So, generally speaking, our clients face a simple set of challenges that sort of, well, seem very similar in the aggregate. They've got to understand what they're optimizing for. Are they optimizing for GHGs or NPVs, for CapEx? Or for reduction in acid mine drainage. And so we help them to understand in our models what you're optimizing for, because a model can only optimize for things that it understands. We then help them to go ahead and find the technologies that help that optimization become a reality, whether they're from things that are off the shelf in the mining industry or things from oil and gas, archaeology, or space and transportation. And then we build models and business cases to help them convince them and others that these technologies are the right set of solutions to bring this to life.
And so, as George said, we're going to share three cases with you today. The first is going to be a complex integrated underground mine operation, and that operation was faced with imminent closure. However, the leadership at the site was certain that they still had an asset that was worth investing in. And so we worked with them to help define a scenario for profitability and investment and actually help them to secure a new future for the site. The second case is going to be around tailings, water, and closure, and how we helped a leading diversified global miner understand what their future liabilities were for their sites and how best to plan for those liabilities. And last, we're going to talk about a greenhouse gas model that was designed at the request of a CEO and their board. We worked with them to help them understand if they were going to make a commitment to the street around greenhouse gas emission reductions, what was a reasonable commitment to make? And in doing so, how to get alignment across the entire organization around both the assumptions and the impacts of the technology, and not just over a short time frame, but over decades.
So we're absolutely glad you joined us today. This is a fascinating topic, but you may be wondering, who are these people and why are they presenting together? So I'll give you a little background on ourselves, and then we'll share a little bit about our partnership. Stratalis is a management consultancy that helps some of the world's leaders in mining and industrial companies to set a vision for the future, to understand how technology can help to transform their operating models and their businesses. We work with all the large mining companies, but we also work with companies outside of mining, ranging from automotive to oil and gas. And that's important because a lot of what we're asked to do is bring insights from outside the mining industry into the mining industry and understand not just what is done, but what is possible.
And so at Stantec, our mining business is over 1,000 people located globally. We cover different services right through from exploration to mine closure. We are a leading engineering and design consultancy firm, and we are very proud to have recently been recognized as the 5th most sustainable company in the world and the 1st in North America. We really, truly are leaders in sustainability.
So, Stantec and Stratalis have been working together for the better part of the decade. And what we've done is we've sort of discovered that there's this interesting opportunity that exists in the market. Management consultants are great for helping you set a vision of the future, understand how to think differently about your business, understand the impact of technology, and to model that to build business cases. But we suck at engineering. Frankly, we shouldn't be doing engineering. That's the job of engineers. And Stantec are a fantastic group of engineers with experience across multiple industries. So, what we've done is we've brought together the most seasoned experts in both of our companies in mining, industrials, strategy, technology, and engineering to solve some of the thorniest challenges that exist in the mining industry in a way that, frankly, no one else can. In the last few years, we have been dealing a lot, as has the industry as a whole, with the challenges of sustainability. Whether that's finding ways to operate in more safer ways using autonomy or data or new technologies, or the challenge of tailings, a real showstopper in the industry, and how to monitor and model and forecast tailings differently, or closure and closed sites because these legacies last for decades. Or, as we'll talk about today, in sustainability, those challenges of water, energy, and GHGs. A lot of our work has been in understanding and helping companies to set a path through the future so that mining lasts not just for years, but for decades. Now, all of these challenges, as I mentioned before, share some similarity. There's usually some emerging challenge or crisis, and frankly, working in traditional ways is recognized won't last for very long. Something's got to change. There's a belief, usually generally across the organization, that technology can help, but sometimes that's all you've got. You hope, believe, but you don't really know what technologies or how or where. And there's a need to quantify whatever you find so that you can convince folks from the operations to the C suite, and in one of our cases, Wall Street, and investors, that these technologies can actually drive a change. Our approach, from a high level point of view, follows four basic steps. One, we start by diagnosing the present. We as a company believe you must understand the problem in order to solve it. And part of that means getting into the operations and understanding individual productivities and performance, whether that's your life of mine plan and understanding how much one machine moves forward every minute, or understanding the impact of specific activities in closure and closed sites. We then bring new technologies and ways of working to the operation to help them future cast a vision of what is possible, understand the suites of technologies that may make an impact, and build this techno-economic model that mirrors the operating reality and future to really apply those technologies and optimize for NPV or GHG. In other words, find the best performing options for the portfolio. Then we take that, we build a roadmap and a case to help bring this portrait of possibilities into something practical and real that everyone can recognize. And we do this really in three different ways, depending on budget and time and available data. We either are getting really deep in building mine level models and site level models for every site in the portfolio, or we're building a prototype. Let's say closure and close site. You're going ahead and you're saying, look, I need something that works whether the site is 1,000 hectares or 10 hectares. And so the model allows you to flex. Or we're looking at something at a portfolio level. Tell me what's the impact of technologies and GHG across my entire business. And each one of these models is going to be part of the cases that we're going to be showing today. So the first one we'll be talking about really is that mine level detailed model.
Right. And so it's not a prototype or a portfolio model. It's an actual working model for a complex underground mine. And this mine was challenged both at depth and laterally with multiple bottlenecks and constraints. In this case, we had a global diversified miner. Their operation did have potential, but they were actually under quite a bit of pressure to close it because of the economics. Due to the constraints that were being faced in this operation, there was no quick and easy technology fix. You couldn't just grab one technology and say, oh, let's implement this and this is going to solve our problems. So even though there was a strong belief that technology would help, it was very difficult to justify the investment. Our job was to come in, we needed to understand what the options were, what technologies were available, and make the case for either keeping the investment in the mine or closing it. When we went to site, this was the picture that we were faced with. We started with working with the operators. We built the mine levels and the ore bodies into our model, but you really didn't need that fancy model when you look at these economics to tell you that at this operation, our client needed to spend some serious money for not a lot of return with a tremendous number of different bottlenecks that they had to solve for. And so that was our starting place in this particular mine. What we did when we went to the site, we sat down with the mine operators. We talked to them about what technologies were out there. We helped them future vision where they wanted to be over a 1 to 5 year term and talked to them about what could really be achievable. In doing so, we worked with them and we created hypotheses around what we thought were potential clusters of technologies that could impact things that mattered most to this mine site, such as OPEX, CAPEX, productivity, and very importantly here, time to implement. This client didn't have a lot of time to try and figure this out, and so we had to move very quickly with them. So the beauty is that when we build this, we get some real numbers around what the technology will do. The downside was that we had to move very quickly. So for the client, we worked on really focusing on what was the problem and developing the right level of economic model. We mapped out all our processes, we understood how everything was performing, and then we worked with the model to automatically discover where the bottlenecks were. It's a pretty cool part of the model. As our model moves forward, it discovers new bottlenecks. It looks at where they are in the current operation. It defines where the bottlenecks are going to be as we fix and solve those other bottlenecks. And in that way, we're able to work to try and maximize the net present value for the site.
So let's talk a little bit about this techno-economic model, which sort of brings all of this together into a system. And it's a little bit like boiling the ocean, but we'll explain the high-level version of this. So as Kate mentioned, we first build a base case. We take the mine operations, productivities for machines, for people, and what that means in terms of cost and NPV and the like, and we put it inside a digital system, right? We build it, levels and everything else. But we first have to start by saying, look, what would happen if you just operated the mine at best practices? And so we build something called an efficiency case. But since this is a technology project, we go ahead and we take those technologies for which we've called vendors and we've understood their cost, their productivity, their impacts, or for the technologies that are more on the emerging side, we make some sort of estimations around what is possible. We put them in the model. And that flexes productivity, it flexes utilization, it flexes equipment availability within each level of the mine, creating new bottlenecks, but also new production capacities along the way. We flex those scenarios along with different things like cost and grade and unknowns, because oftentimes clients will ask us, well, what happens if, I don't know, nickel is price X or copper is price Y or gold is Z? So we understand how technologies might serve a different need depending on their view of the future. And that allows us to create a roadmap, a business case, and a set of options for any operation trying to think about transforming itself. So where that takes us is from a mine that, as you might recall, didn't have much of a bright future and that was going to close in just a number of years, to an operation where reinvestment was not just possible, but attractive. Jobs were saved, and the executive decided to really look at this mine as a strong and healthy part of the portfolio. And what's kind of fascinating about this is it didn't even take that much additional CapEx investment to what was originally planned. Kate, you want to talk a little bit about what's going on with this mine now? Because I know you're still working with it.
Yeah, absolutely, George. Since we did this modeling work, we've been engaged with the client, performing a number of different FEL studies, analyzing what the best path forward is for investment for this site, and some really great opportunities opening up for the client here.
Absolutely. So now on to our second case, where we're moving from a mine level model to much more of a portfolio level model. We had a tier one miner who has a number of closing and closed sites and legacy assets. And as so many miners do in this world, they're facing an increase in provision challenges in safety. Now, if you know anything about closed sites, you know that they're generally speaking not exactly technology ready. For a good reason. They've often been decommissioned. And they're often in remote areas. So it's a challenge to really think about applying new futuristic technologies, whether it's in moving dirt or monitoring tailings dams, to places that are well lacking some of the basics for modern technology. But we believed, and the client believed, that technology could fundamentally change the provision that was laid forward for these, make them safer, more sustainable, and frankly, a little cheaper to manage for decades. So we really started, as we do with all of our projects, in taking a first principles approach to the work.
Yeah, and so as George was saying, when we work with clients, we really need to understand right up front what is the problem that we're trying to solve. In this particular case, when we worked with the client, we said to them, could you give us a map of all the work that you're actually doing at site to get us started? We just need to understand all the different activities that you're doing. And their response to us was, well, no, you'd have to go and ask our consultants. And so when we went to the consultants and asked them for this information, they were like, oh, no, we don't have that level of detail. We've never thought about it that way. And if we did, we don't know that we'd even really want to give it to you. And so we were in a bit of a conundrum there. So with this mining company not really knowing all the activities and the work they were doing, we needed to start mapping it out from first principles. So we broke down all the work that was being done, whether it was moving things around, cleaning things, monitoring things. We really broke it down into the discrete work elements. And we did it because for this client, we needed to understand where the bottlenecks were, and we needed to understand them in terms of labor, cost, most importantly, in terms of safety.
And what's kind of interesting here is that this sort of work is not typical for closure and closed sites. A map like this is not something that, generally speaking, is lying around. But when you do this sort of work, when you look at the jobs to be done, and you do it, frankly, in plain English, looking at work in simple set of tasks, what you discover is that a lot of the traditional ways of viewing mining, viewing closure, viewing closed sites, start to look, well, like problems that technology could solve, not just massive engineering conundrums. After all, when you close a site, you need to move dirt. When you treat a tailings dam, you need to sample water. And technology can sample water. Technology can move dirt. Technology can do lots of things, but it's got to understand the problem it's solving. And so we look at it from a set of series of simple work and then ask what technologies today and in the future could make that work possible in new, safer, and less expensive ways. And when we did that, we really ended up creating a new map of looking at the work of closure and closed sites, which allowed us to go outside mining to find solutions.
Yeah, and so really importantly, when we work with George, we look across our entire suite of business units. We within Stantec have oil and gas, we have smart cities, we do autonomous vehicles, and we're really looking to get into those different industries and repurpose the technology such that we can leverage it into mining and understanding what the impacts of those new technologies could be to our industry.
That's right. So when you look at revegetation, sometimes you're looking at drones that can shoot seeds into the ground using special nano coatings to allow the seeds to sort of grow faster and have a better chance of not having to be redone. And so that work, is it from forestry, but it's also from genetics. When you look at utilities and you find new ways to understand how do the city of London manage their pipe infrastructure, well, that's the same sort of thing that can be applied to mining with machines that crawl inside of piping and use scanning technology like LiDAR and photogrammetry to understand the structure of a pipe. When you look at archaeology and you understand how they looked inside the pyramids of Giza with muon tomography, you realize the same sort of thing can be done to look into tailings dams. And so it's looking from the outside and coming in that we find new and interesting technologies to change the future. And so we took an approach to look at the technologies that existed and were emerging and essentially forecast their maturity using a series of complex S curves and expert guidance, and then say, well, how would those technologies impact closure and closed sites? And how would we put them inside a model? As we mentioned before, everything that we found about technology is that it happens in suites, in little clusters. When you look at how modern technologies can impact, say, bathymetry, understanding the depth and the size and the space and the composition of a lake in tailings, for example, you realize it's not just a sensor, but it's a suite of technology that has to come together to make that happen. And so we take those suites and we put them, in this particular case, in a techno-economic portfolio model for closure and closed sites. We created this prototype model that could say, look, if my site is, I don't know, 1 mile wide by 1 mile long, and it has 3 dams, and the dams are of this composition, what would that mean in terms of the impact of technology? Really allowing our clients, because they had so many sites of this nature, and they didn't want us to build, well, 100 different models, to go ahead and flex the footprint of the site, the needs of the site, the kinds of vegetation and revegetation you needed to rehabilitate the site, and then build this site model that allows us to flex the technologies against the activities and say, hey, this is the stuff that's going to give you the greatest impact on, say, NPV. And this is really helping to guide their view of where to invest in the future in terms of new technologies and in terms of the greatest bang for their buck for efforts across closure, closed sites, legacy assets, tailings, and the like. And this is really kind of important because, at the end of the day, while people invest in technologies and they invest in capabilities and they invest in models, really they invest in a vision of the future. Folks want to change their operations, all of us, to something more amazing, something that's fundamentally going to transform our industry as a whole. And by putting these technologies together in a roadmap and helping the companies to sort of create a vision of what the future of tailings or closed sites or closure or mining could be, you're really not just able to decide what technologies to invest in, but you're able to inspire. And inspiration is really important in getting these sorts of transformation projects done. So our third case deals with helping a CEO and the board of a leading mining company to set their targets and their vision around GHGs and energy reduction, which of course all the major mining companies are doing today. In this particular case, the executives wanted to know what was a reasonable and feasible GHG reduction target to promise to the street and to set as a target for their various operations across their entire portfolio, a number of different commodities within a large mining company. But because regulations are kind of fluid, will there be GHG credits? Won't there be GHG credits? When will it happen? What technologies? Fuel cells, batteries, ammonia, methanol, who knows what? Because there are all these different options and it's not quite clear who's going to win and who's going to lose, the model had to be flexible in this regard to allow them as a group to sit down, play with the assumptions and the options, and no matter what, still set a target that they could live with. So, what we did was create this portfolio level model that gives you a directional view of the future of the mining industry and the future of technology to set GHG targets. And alongside with Stantec, we still had to model various high level views of the operation, right? Whether it's open pit or underground, whether it's understanding the impact on rail or understanding the impact on energy generation. We still had to have an engineering level understanding of the different facets of the business. What was most importantly here was because assumptions were so fluid, the client really wanted the ability to look at these assumptions across the entire portfolio of business. And so what we did was we built a model that did a high level mirroring of the operations, but a very detailed view of potential assumptions and how they might change. So that in real time, executives could sit in a room, play with the assumptions, and see what that meant around their GHG target promises. This essentially allowed them across their business to do a lot of what if analysis, to look at, what happens if fuel cells happen in 2035, or what happens if they don't, and we're forced to use, new types of battery technologies, or if we're forced to move to hybrids across large trucks, small trucks, and everything in between. And so by doing so, you're able to really sit down and make decisions in a way that traditionally would seem very complex. I mean, the world is an extremely complex place today with new technologies. And this sort of simplifies it and allows them to sit down and really create an easy way to flex the unknown to come up with a set of targets that they can live with. This allowed the CEO and the executives to make a promise to shareholders, to communities, to the world as a whole around what they would do in terms of GHG reduction, and provided them also with a way to input what the actual mining operations were working on and doing to see whether or not they were keeping track and on target for those promises. And so it was a balance, if you will, a portfolio level model to help make decisions around the future. So that is really our high level view. Thank you for joining us today around techno-economic model for sustainability and decision making. Again, if you're interested in what Stratalis does or what Stantec does, or more importantly, what we do together, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Kate as you wish.